this summer to visit us?
Okay, we are going to begin with the what I call the maskana of the Taz, meaning there was a havamin in the Taz, and that's how he understood it at the beginning. And then there was a maskana as he concludes, based on a certain proof that we'll see in a minute. So the Taz writes the following: Omnam achar ha'iyun, after looking at it a second time, iyanti nira diyesh ledamos din zeh. So again, he's talking about a case where he made Kiddush on water instead of wine, and he wants to compare it L'mashakasa b'siman Reish Ayin Beis. We're in Reish Ayin Aleph. He's fast forwarding one siman beyond us. The din Kidesh b'makom suuda. The kaimel sham. Dim Kidesh al das lechol kan. So his initial intention was to eat here, and he recited Kiddush. Ubalo ezo siba, for some reason, tzarech lakar mimkom zeh, he has to uproot himself from this place, and tzarech, he has to reestablish his suda elsewhere. So now his kiddush was made in makom X, and now he's eating his suda in makom Y. Tzarech lachzor ulekadesh, the Mechaber Paskins in Shulchan Aruch, that he needs to recite a second kiddush. And basically his first kiddush is levatola. It's completely meaningless. V'afal gavda hach kiddush b'makom suda eno ela derabbanan. So the Taz is implying a question here, namely that as far as the doraisa chiyuv of Zochres Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho, you don't need a makom suda. In fact, we can add here to the Taz the famous psak of the Magen Avram that you were yotze already in tefillah, but certainly tefillah is not makom suuda. And there's a whole sugi in the Gemara about those who hear the kiddush in shul, whether they yotze or not. And basically, it depends on whether they'll eat the suda in shul, like some of the guests or people who didn't have a place, a roof over their head. But for those who are going home, then it's kiddush shelo b'makom suda, and the Rabbanan required kiddush b'makom suda. So now he made kiddush in place X. He removes himself, uproots himself from place X, and now settles down in place Y. And as a result, his original kiddush that he made in place X was shelo b'makom suda. And now he has to make a new kiddush b'makom suda, even though the requirement of makom suda is only derabanan. So afilu achi tzarich lachzor shenis ulakadesh. For who had dinamikan here also in the case where he was mekadesh al mayim, even though he was yotze the kiddush al mayim on a doraisa level, tzarich lekadesh shenis al yayin. So the Taz's maskana is based on an analogy between Kiddush shelo b'makom suda, with halach is paskin that he has to recite a new Kiddush, and Kiddush al hamayim, says the Taz, you would also have to recite a whole new Kiddush. And the Kiddush here is that even though he was Yotze the Doraisa, but nevertheless he wasn't Yotze Midrabbana because the Rabbana required Makom Suda, or in the case of Mayim, the Rabbana required Kiddush al Yayin, and he didn't make Kiddush al Yayin. But despite the fact that he was Mekayim his mitzvah doraisa, nevertheless the Rabbanan are going to require him to make a new Kiddush in order to fulfill their requirements, their conditions, midrabbanan. And based on what we've said until now, and I hope you've been with me, well, not necessarily last week, but over the course of time, you've been with me, and you realize that the issue here is whether Rabbanan created a brand new Kiddush as an independent mitzvah like Chanukah or Megillah or Netilas Yadayim, or no, the Rabbanan only created Yayin as an attachment, lahasmiches hayayin lekiddush doraisa. But then, if you go with the second approach, second definition, then Kiddush midrabanan doesn't stand on its own. It's not a separate entity. It's got to be attached to the Kiddush doraisa, which he already completed. So once he completed it, that was the Taz's original position. It's too late to make Kiddush. And therefore, if he made Kiddush al Yayin, too late. But says the Taz now, Lamaskon, if that be the case, then if he made Kiddush on this makom, and then he decided he's got to eat his Suda elsewhere, he shouldn't have to make another Kiddush because the Rabbanan only attached the Kiddush to the original Doraisa. Now you fulfill the Doraisa. There's no need to make a new Kiddush on its own. And therefore, in the case of Mayim, there's no new Kiddush ala Mayim. You already were Yotzim Doraisa. But from the fact that the halacha requires that you have to make a new Kiddush in the case where it's Oker Makomo Harishon, you see that Kiddush D'Rabbanan is a Machayev unto itself, and that obligation has to be fulfilled as if he didn't make Kiddush. So we're going to put the Dorais on the side now and, so to speak, ignore it, put it on the back burners. And now we start with the D'Rabbanan. He's going to have to make a new Kiddush. And therefore, by analogy, the same thing has to apply in the case where he made Kiddush al Mayim, and now he needs to make Kiddush al Hayayin in order to fulfill the rabbinic requirement of Yayin, and that will require him to make a brand new Kiddush, and he'll forfeit the old Kiddush. Yeah, Joe.
I just want to get it clarified with regards to his Kiddush al Mayim. He knew he was making Kiddush al Mayim, and
he thought he was making Kiddush al Yayin.
So the bracha was the wrong bracha to begin with. So
correct. He made the wrong bracha.
So are you saying? So how are we looking at this? You're saying
we're looking at it on two levels, Joe. On a Doraisa level and on a D'Rabbanan level. On a Doraisa level, he did perfectly well. It doesn't matter whether he thought he had Mayim or he thought he had Yayin, because the Torah doesn't require neither Mayim nor Yayin. So that's totally
understood. But nobody's saying because the bracha was the wrong bracha, it's nullified everything that he said up to this point. Nobody says
again,
something like that.
I'm trying to press this point that on a Doraisa level, it was the right bracha. It was the perfect bracha. This was Zachar Yas Yom Shabbos L'Kadsha. This was the fulfillment of the Torah law. Now the Rabbanan said you need Yayin, so that's a new obligation.
Yeah, I understand.
And we're going to have to require a new Kiddush in order to fulfill that obligation.
Right, I understand. But you're saying, again, I'm just making sure to clarify that even though nobody says because he made the wrong bracha on the
again, I can say it over and over again. It's just going to go back and forth like a ping pong ball. He made the wrong bracha on a D'Rabbanan level. And now the question is, does that D'Rabbanan obligation require a new Kiddush? On a Doraisa level, we're going to kiss him, we're going to hug him, and we're going to say, wow, that was a great bracha that you made. There was a wonderful bracha.
Okay.
And it all boils down to our old suffix, whether or not Kiddush D'Rabbanan stands on its own, or it's got to be attached to Kiddush Doraisa. Says the Taz L'Maskana in his final conclusion, L'achar Sheyanti, he says, that if you're going to tell me that Kiddush D'Rabbanan doesn't stand on its own, and it doesn't obligate and generate a new Kiddush because he was Yotzer already Doraisa, then what are you going to do with the halacha of Shalom B'Makom Suda, where the D'Rabbanan requirement of Makom Suda is going to generate a whole new Chiyuv and a whole new Kiddush? Obviously, then we have to assume that the vision of the Chachamim to create Kiddush stands on its own as a chiyuv, independent of Kiddush Doraisa, and even though he was Makayim already Kiddush Doraisa, he's got to make a new Kiddush in order to fulfill Kiddush D'Rabbanan, and therefore Shalom B'Makom Suda. And now we're going to come to the same conclusion with regard to Kiddush al Mayim. He needs Kiddush al Yayin. Okay, he's going to require a whole new Kiddush. So on the one hand, I have to tell you, this is a brilliant diuk of the Taz, brilliant. Who would have thought, that he would find a clear-cut black and white proof to the fact that Kiddush D'Rabbanan stands on its own, independent of Kiddush Doraisa, and it's B'chayev its own Kiddush. And the Taz accomplished just that. Simply by fast-forwarding by one Siman in Shulchan Aruch, and reading to us what the Mechaber Paskins in the very next Simon with regard to Akar Mukomo, and he's got to make a whole new Kiddush, which, as the Taz points out brilliantly, is only a D'Rabbanan. But I'm very, very upset. Because if you recall, the Taz proved his original position based on the halach of Nishpach. He made Kiddush al Yayin, and then before he got a chance to drink the Yayin, the cup spilled, and he cannot retrieve that Yayin. It's gone. Don't cry over spilled wine. And Allah is the Shulchan Aruch Paskins in Nishbach Hayayin. He does not make a new Kiddush. He was already Yotze his Kiddush Doraisa on the Yayin. And even though he didn't fulfill his mitzvah of Yayin because it spilled, nevertheless, he will not make a new Kiddush. And from there, the Taz had derived the conclusion that Kiddush D'Rabbanan does not stand on its own, but rather it has to be attached to Kiddush D'Oraisa. And since he made Kiddush Al Yayin, and that Kiddush is D'Oraisa, now if he's going to make a brand new Kiddush, it's going to be on its own. And that we don't have. And that's why Nishbach HaMayim, the Shulchan Aruch Paskins, you don't recite Kiddush again. So the Taz is very, very aware of this problem because he himself was the one who proved his case up front from the beginning based on Nishpach. What are we going to do with Nishpach now? Why doesn't he have to have another Kiddush?
But can't you say that he was Yaitza, his Kiddush D'Rabbanan, the fact that he didn't drink, okay, he didn't drink,
Right.
like that's...
Correct. And that's where the Taz quotes a tour to try to indicate that there is a requirement of Shtiyas Hayayin. It's not enough to recite a Kiddush ala Kos Yayin, but you've got to drink the wine. Now, exactly who has to drink the wine and how we divvy up the wine, that's going to be a discussion for us maybe today, maybe another day. But the assumption of the tour seems to be that you have to drink from the kos. Now, it could be that one person could drink from the kos and represent the entire, all the mesubin. Okay, but that's a different issue. Whether each person individually has to drink from the kos, very important issue. But one thing is clear, that you have to drink from the kos. And if the kos spilled, nobody drank from the kos, then you aren't Yotzi Kiddush Al Yayin. So the Taz, very much aware of this issue, gives the following answer. He says, no. The Shulchan Aruch didn't paskin that you were Yotze with Kiddush Al Yayin Shenishpach. No. What the Shulchan Aruch paskin is that you have to bring another kos of Yayin and recite a Bori Priya Gofen on the second kos, and then you don't have to recite Kiddush again. So again, let's emphasize. We're not saying that when the kos spills, fartig and asik, as we say in Yiddish, it's over the store, it's all over you, Makayim, this and that. That's not what we're saying. That would undermine everything that the Taz is saying now, Lamaskana. No. You're still chayiv in Kiddush. But you'll bring another kos, and you'll make a Bori Priya Gofen on the second kos, and then Tam V'Nishlam, you're finished. Now, the Taz doesn't really explain to us how he solved his problem. True, I mean, we can't deny it. The Shulchan Aruch requires that you bring a second kos, but the Shulchan Aruch says you don't require Kiddush on the second kos. You already fulfilled your mitzvah of Kiddush. So why in the case of Mayim, the Taz says you got to recite a whole new Kiddush? You made Kiddush Al Yayin? That's no good. Batal Muvutal. You have to start from scratch. Make a new Kiddush. And the Taz came to that conclusion, arrived at or proved it from the Halach of Shalom B'Makom Suda, that we start from scratch and we have a whole new Kiddush. And yet here in the case of Nishpach, where the Taz is assuming you haven't fulfilled your mitzvah of Kiddush Al Yayin, says the Taz, but it's enough if we bring you another cup of wine and you'll make a Bar Priya Gofen and drink the second kos of Yain. No need to repeat Kiddush. What is going on here? So I believe that the key word here to understand, unlock the mystery of the Taz is substitution. or if you like a different word, replacement. I mean, Moshe Lamad over Dome, imagine if there's a vote in the government or the board or whatever it might be, and they need X number of votes, and Ploni Almoni has to travel abroad. He has to find someone, I'll say proverbially, to sit in his chair to replace him in order to get that quorum of people that we need in order to pass the vote. It's almost as if somebody else will slip into his shoes. Again, you may have all sorts of conditions, who that person is, and, was he authorized to vote against the plenum or with the plenum, whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, there's a halacha, so to speak, of substitution, where Shimon will now slip into the shoes of Reuven. I was hoping last week, Joe, somebody would slip into your shoes, but we didn't get anybody. But at least Bobby was there, and I think Bruce was there. That was it. We were just me, Bobby, and Bruce. But okay, we have to do a new recruitment for the Shia, and I'm willing to change whatever you want me to change. But whatever. Just invite your friends. That's all I'm asking. Okay, fine. Let's get back to the discussion here. So it could be that what the Taz is saying, that there's something magical going on. You bring a second kos, and that second kos will fill in for the kos that spilled. And the Kiddush that he made originally is now chal on the second kos, as if it were the first kos. And he drinks the second kos. He's got to make a bar priyaguf. We'll see about that. But Kiddush, he was yotze. And it means that now the second kos is samuch to his original Kiddush. Now, I have to add one important point here, because I looked in the Magen Avram, and it seems like the Magen Avram, later on in Reish Ayin Beis, when he talks about this case of Nishpach, requires that the second kos that he's bringing to substitute for the first one that spilled was brought without hesech hadas. Now, what that means in the flesh means that, he didn't say, well, let's take a little break. Let's ask a neighbor for a cup of wine, or a different bottle of wine. Baruch Hashem, we have a lot of good neighbors here, and they're very kosher Jews. They'll give us a kosher bottle of wine. No. That's not what happened. He had wine available. But wait a second. You see, when you say he had wine available, that's a proximity and location. It might also impact on time, exactly how much time passed by, but it doesn't really touch on das. And the Magen Avram emphasizes that we need below hesech hadas. So I would add the following condition: that when he made Kiddush al Yayin, subconsciously, not consciously, he didn't anticipate that he would spill the wine. He had in mind that if need be, he's got a bottle of wine here. He took a cup of wine, but it spilled then he's going to go back to that bottle of wine, pour it into the cup without hesech hadas. Again, it's hard to translate those words, without any discontinuity of his thought process. So he wasn't thinking about the Toronto Maple Leafs or something like that in the middle. He immediately took the second cup of wine to substitute for the first cup of wine. And it mamish like slips in. But he still needs a bar priyaguf.
Yeah, why?
That's what I want to know. But before we get to that question, I want one previous question. What now would the Taz say about the fact that he made Kiddush al Hamayin? And the Taz was saying that he has to make a new Kiddush. I think now we have to qualify that. Bamed Dvarim Amurim, you're familiar with that phrase. Bamed Dvarim Amurim, when does the Taz require that after you made Kiddush al Hamayin, he's got to make a new Kiddush al Yayin. That's only if there was no Hesech Hadas and there was no wine to be had. But in the case in this place called Merin, which I don't know where it is, if you can look it up on Google, maybe it's in Poland. I don't know where it is, but in Merin, in that story, you remember he had two cups in front of him, so that there was no Hesech Hadas when he realized, oh no, Shakaru, I made Kiddush on the wrong cup. I made Kiddush on Mayim instead of Yayin. So immediately, without Hesech Hadas, he picks up the cuss of Yayin and he drinks that wine. And I'm going to go a step further than that. I'm going to suggest that he doesn't even need a Bori Pri Agafen. So again, when the Taz says that he made Kiddush al Mayim, he's going to now have to make a new Kiddush. He's talking about a case where all he had was one cup. What was in the cup? Mayim. Now he has to go to his shelf and so forth, maybe to his neighbor, and get a cup of wine because he thought he had wine in the cup. Oy. But in a case specifically that was addressed by the Taz, where he has in front of him two cups of wine, then I would submit the Taz would agree he doesn't make a second Kiddush on the Yayin. It's no different than the case of Nishpach, where if we bring him a second cuss of Yayin, the Taz says explicitly that's fine, as long as there was no Hesech Hadas we added. But I would go even a step further and say that in the case of Mayim and Yayin in front of him, he would not even have to make a new Bar Pri Agafen. But then you can ask me, why is it that in the case of Nishpach, he has to make another Bar Pri Agafen?
I don't. Why is the Rav saying that? When he said the first Kiddush on the wine, the reason why he's only making a Borei Pegafen on the second one is because his Kiddush was kiyum from the Durabanan, from both, you're saying the Duraisa, okay, and from the Durabanan on wine. And all that's missing is he needs to be kiyum the bracha of Borei Pegafen. That's why he's only making it. On the first one, I understand Doraisa, he still had it, but from a Durabanan.
Wait a minute, the Taz is saying that in the case of Mayim, he has to make a whole new Kiddush.
And the Taz says because his first bracha was not, he did not time the kedusha with wine. It was all wrong.
So therefore, the Rabbanan required a whole new Kiddush.
So, but there's no, it's not a Hesach, it's not because of a question of Hesach Hadash.
No, but wait a second, Joe. Here's the problem. If you're saying that in the case of Mayim, he's got to make a whole new Kiddush, then why in the case of Nishpach, the Shulchan Aruch passes he doesn't have to make a whole new Kiddush? He just brings another cup of wine.
Because it was sanctified on wine. It was
okay.
He was
already
No, that's not what the Taz is saying. I'll read to you the Taz. The Taz is not saying that he made Kiddush on the wine. The Taz is saying that Nishpach HaYayin, and therefore he needs Yayin, but you don't have to make a new Kiddush. Now, the Taz doesn't just say, how should I say, Sof Pasuk, that's it. You don't have to make Kiddush al Yayin. No. That's not what he's saying. In the case of Nishpach, he really does have to make a new Kiddush, but he says that magically I can swing in another cup of wine, and now I could salvage the Kiddush. Again, if let's say, for example, in the case of Nishpach, he has no other wine, the Taz is saying he has to make a whole new Kiddush. The only reason he could get away with it and salvage the Kiddush is only because he has another cup of wine to bring in and substitute for the cup that's spilled. So I don't want anyone to entertain the idea in the context of the Taz that you can be yotzei by making Kiddush al Yayin without drinking the wine. Again, we can talk about how many people have to drink the wine and how much they have to drink. I mean, that's a whole sugya unto itself. But there's got to be, Nishpach requires that you bring another. If you don't bring another cup after the first cup spilled, the Taz says explicitly, it's like the case where he was Oker Memakomo and he wasn't Yotzei Kiddush Makom Suda, he's got to make a whole new Kiddush. So again, don't get confused about the fact that there was a cup of wine. That's irrelevant. He did not drink from the cup of wine. And this, by the way, again, we don't want to get into it now because another hour that would, I think we beat the dead horse already in the Tosas Rid. But you remember the Tosas Rid says the Nazir has to drink the wine, even though a Nazir is enjoined from drinking wine, as we learned 4 days ago in Parshas Noso. But if it's Yain Shel Kiddush, the Tosas Rid says he drinks the wine. Well, why not just make Kiddush al Yain and not drink the wine? So apparently, it's not enough to make Kiddush al Yain. You've got to drink the wine. And in the Taz, that's 100% correct. And therefore, in the case of Nishpach, where you didn't drink the wine, basically, fundamentally, you have to recite Kiddush again. Like the case of Shalom B'Makom Suda. Even though Midaraisi was Yotzei, the Rabbanan created a whole new entity of Kiddush the Rabbanan. And that requires Kiddush al Yayin. You have to drink the wine. Comes along the Taz, and that's where we got a little bit complicated here. And the Taz says, no, wait a minute. You know what? I have a way of solving the situation. I'm not sure you have to make another Kiddush, even in the case of Nishpach. Why? Because in the case of Nishpach, I can bring in a cup of wine, and that wine will be like the first cup of wine, and he'll drink the second cup of wine as if he was drinking the first cup of wine. What's that? What's the word I'm looking for? Just give me a second. There's an English word I'm looking for. When you get pleasure from somebody else.
Vicarious.
Oh, good. That was the word I needed. The second cup of wine is vicariously the first cup of wine. And therefore, you are Yotzei Kiddush if you drink the second cup of wine. I just made 2 points. Point number 1, the Magen Avram points out it's got to be without a Hesech Hadas. So it's not like he went to, down the block on on whatever street in order to get another cup of wine. It's right there available somewhere within his radius of Dalet Amos. And the second point is, why do we need a Bar Priyagov? Which we didn't even get to yet. That's like paragraph number 2. We're still in paragraph number 1. Why are we in paragraph number 1? Because we want to check out what are the implications of the Taz with regard to Mayin. And the answer is, if the Yayin is right there in front of him. So 2 points I want to make. Point number 1 is he would not have to recite a new Kiddush. Because it's no worse than Nishpach, where the Taz allows you to bring it in a second cup to substitute for the first. Here it's even better than that. It's almost Hadvarim Kal V'chomer. He has that yayin to drink from the beginning. Okay, he made a mistake and he made Kiddush al Hamayim. And the second point I want to make is that I don't believe he even has to have a Bori Priyagaf. But the Taz is talking about a case where a person thought he had a cup of wine. Imagine if somebody pulled this kind of shtick. I mean, I would tar and feather him. But what he did was, it's a pretty good idea. He took the cup from the Mekadesh, and unbeknown to the Mekadesh, he poured water in the cup. It's like at my father's chasana, one of the smart Alex of his chevra took the glass out of you have to put your foot and stomp on the glass in order to say Zeichel L'Churban. And what he did was he put in a schnapps gläsel. And there was my father, again, I was not born yet, but there was my father trying to smash this, he could have, and immediately he knew who did it. He sensed it, So imagine if that same person who fooled my father and put in the schnapps gläsel, he would take my father's Kiddush cup and put in water instead of yayin. In that case, the Taz would require a brand new Kiddush. Because that would be like the case in Nishpach, where you require a brand new Kiddush. The only thing is, the Taz qualifies that and says that in Nishpach you could bring another cup of wine. In Mayim, he doesn't have another cup of wine. But Lu Yitzur, he has another cup of wine, like the Meisin Merin. You remember Merin that we started with? And he had 2 cups in front of him. And he made the mistake. It wasn't that somebody fooled him and poured Mayim into his Kiddush cup. He had the 2 cups. And mistakenly, he made Kiddush al Hamayim. In such a case, The yayin is right there in front of him. There's no hesech hadas. He immediately realizes his mistake. And Berzon is going to claim that he doesn't even have to make a bar priyagof. But again, we didn't discuss bar priyagof yet. That's what I'm ready to discuss now in paragraph number 2. Okay, then I don't know if David is here. I see the Kotel here. I don't know.
I still think that you can differentiate between the Mayim case and the Yayin case, essentially like Joe was saying, because Yayin, I made Kiddush on wine. With Mayim, I did not make Kiddush on wine. And I think that could be
I'm very much aware of that distinction, but the Taz, is not on. He's not on board with you. He holds that the mitzvah is to drink the yain. No, you're right. I'm not denying. Please, Rabbi, don't misunderstand me. There are many shitas, and there are certainly many shitas that would hold that the shtia is not critical. But even those shitas basically say that somebody has to drink from the wine. I don't know if there's any shita in the poskim who would say that if you made Kiddush al Yayin and then it was Nishpach and no one in the Mesubin drank from the wine that you were Yotzi. I don't know that there's anyone who says that. Maybe there is, but certainly not in Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch says they have to bring a second kos of wine.
You see, it's like
that the second kos substitutes and steps into the shoes of the first kos.
See, what we're trying to say, Rav, is if, let's say, a guy makes a leishe basukah in a apostle sukkah, it's no good from any standpoint. So there's nothing. It's just not a proper bracha.
Is it possible b'd'oraisa or possible b'drabbanan?
Possible d'oraisa.
Then the bracha is worthless. But if it was possible only d'rabbanan, right. Like for example,
no, but if it's a pasul sukkah, then there's nothing. So here he's making a bracha. Can you make a bracha of shahakol? Actually, Bobby, that's a point. You can make shahakol on yayin, right? So in a certain way, maybe
he actually shahakol. He said bari priyagofen.
Oh, right. So you can't make a bari priyagofen on water. So he's all right. Okay, Rav, we're not going to convince you, I guess. Okay, never mind.
No. I'm just telling you that the Shulchan Aruch paskins that in the case of Nishpach, he's got to bring wine in order to drink the wine.
Yeah. We're not talking from that standpoint. We're talking from the standpoint of when he made the Kiddush on the water, because his vehicle was absolutely wrong. So the Kiddush had nothing to latch onto to be a proper Kiddush. That's what we're trying to say. So that's why he has to make a complete Kiddush over. Whereas when he made the Kiddush on Yayin and it spilled, the Kiddush latched onto a proper Yayin. It was a proper Kiddush. It latched onto a proper wine. He hasn't been Mekayim the bracha of the Yayin, because it spilled. So he doesn't want to do a bracha of atala, so to speak, so he has to do it again. But the Kiddush was latching.
What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to explain the Taz.
Yeah. Okay.
That's right now my goal. The Taz is saying that he has an absolute equation between Nishpach and Mayim. In both cases, he's not Yotzei Kiddush, he has to recite Kiddush again. Then he goes ahead and he says in another paragraph that in the case of Nishpach, he can bring another kos of yain to substitute. I'm pointing out that based on the analogy of the Taz, the same thing would apply in the case of Mayim. But again, under one condition, that he's not running around, looking somewhere on the face of the earth for yain. And that's why I point out that in the Mice of Merin, he had the yain in front of him. So it's a step better than, or easier than the case of Nishpach, where he has to bring a cup of yain. Here he doesn't even have to move from the spot. He's got the kos of yain right in front of him. Now let's go back to the question of Bar Priyagof, because I find this a fascinating question. And I think, Bobby, I'm going to formulate the question, and I hope that you'll be satisfied with the way I formulate. Let's go over the facts on the ground. The Taz is saying that if he made Kiddush al Yayin v'nishpach hayayin, he brings another cup of wine, and he's going to make a Bar Priyagofen, and he doesn't recite Kiddush. So I'm going to formulate the following question, which I think is what you had in mind. Mimonefshach. If you're saying that the second cup of wine substitutes for the first cup of wine, then why do you have to make another bar pri hagafen? And if on the other hand, you're going to tell me that you can't take another cup of wine to substitute for the first wine that's spilled, so why doesn't he have to recite Kiddush again? Meaning the Taz is coming up with a very complex situation here in halachic terms. On the one hand, he's saying, you know what? Bring another cup of wine and you're okay. But on the other hand, he says you're not okay until you make a bar pri hagafen. But I don't get it. If the yesod here is that you could salvage your Kiddush because your Kiddush is chal on the yayin that you brought the second course, then why shouldn't your Kiddush be chal on the yayin of the second course, even vis-a-vis the bracha bar pri hagafen? So you made a bar pri hagafen on the first cup of wine, it spilled, but now you bring in a second cup of wine, and now you could salvage the bar pri hagafen. The bar pri hagafen will be chal on the second course. Oh, why are you two?
Hi, guys.
Hi. Oh, when you got there, it was ready already? You had to wait? Oh, no, how long?
Figured go again.
You didn't call them first.
I tried, but they didn't pick the phone.
Oh. Why are there two bags here? I don't get it. Oh, I see. So, Rabosai, if you're with me, what I'd like to present is what I call a brisker tzvei dinin. And I went sightseeing, not today, but yesterday. Had a little time in the afternoon. I had a meeting with someone in Geula. And for the first time in my life, because I had this free time, I asked around, where's Brisk? And I went to see, for the first time in my life, the Brisker Yeshiva. And it was very uplifting for me. Just going to close the door here. And you know, Reb Chaim was very famous for tzvei dinim, which means that he would take two laws that seem almost identical and bifurcate them, split them, and show you how they're two, categorically, they're two different halachas. So I want to suggest the following. There's Birchat HaNehenin, and there are the other brachos. Let's start with Birchat HaNehenin. Here's my question. I'm going to give you A and B, but I know it's not A and I know it's B, and I'll try to prove it to you. A, do you recite a Birchas HaNehenin and then you have Hanoah, whether it's Achila, Shtia, whatever it might be, or no? B, you have to attach the Hanoah to the bracha. It's not that you did the bracha, you recite the bracha, and then you have the Hanoah, and they're two separate entities. But rather, in a positive way, you have to integrate that Hanoah into the bracha to the extent that they merge into one entity. So again, in the first understanding, make the bracha, have the Hanoah. The second understanding is that the Hanoah that you have has to become part of the bracha. But let me try to flesh it out. Sounds very abstract. Let's say you made the bracha, and then you were mafsik. And you recited a few words, very short, who won the hockey game? and that's it. And then you ate the bread or whatever it is. So once you are mafsik, then you're not yotze. You have to make the bracha again. But that doesn't really prove anything. Could be they're two separate entities, but there's a halach of a mafsik. And the mafsik is like a chatzitza. It's like a wall that separates between your bracha and your hana. But let's ask a different question. What happens if he made the bracha, he wasn't mafsik, but he took his pretty time? He delayed, he dilly-dallied. So I'm going to try to prove to you that in such a case, he's not yotze, even though there was no hefsek. And the bracha and the hana have to be within what's called toch kidei dibur. So even in shtika, which means he didn't speak out, he forfeits the bracha. Why? There was no hefsek. And I'm going to tell you the following. If a man shechts an animal and he waits a few seconds to shecht the second animal, he doesn't have to make another bracha on the second animal. But in the case of Birchat HaNehenin, if you wait and delay before you enjoy the hana, then you haven't yet integrated in a positive kum vaseh, a davar mitzarev, to link the two together. And I'll go a step further. What happens if you have two cherries on the table? I guess in Toronto you've been having cherries for months, but we just started getting cherries like a week ago. I made a shechiyanu on cherries. I love cherries. And you made a bracha on cherry number 1. You picked it up and you said, Bar Priya Eitz, and it fell. Shulchan Aruch paskins, you have to make another bracha to eat the second cherry. So you see that the bracha is chal on the chefta. The object of your hana becomes part of the bracha. Who says this? Burzon. And you can either take it or leave it. I think it's emes lamita. And this is a special halacha in Birchat HaNehenin, that the bracha and the hana become one, and the bracha is chal on the hana, but on that specific object that you designated for that bracha. And there cannot be any hefsek even b'shtika. Not so in any other bracha. In any other bracha, all we have to avoid is a hefsek. The hefsek will invalidate the bracha. But if there's no hefsek, even though it's two different actions, the bracha and whatever comes afterwards, that's fine. And shtika, even after Kedei Dibur, would not be a problem. In Yiddish, we would say it's a bezunder halacha in Hilchas Birchas HaNehenin. I'll give you a mashal of my dover domen. Any of you gentlemen blow tekios on shofar? Do we have a Baal Tokei in the audience? No. Anyway, so you know there's something called tashrat. Tashrat means shvarim trua. We don't know if the trua of the Torah is a shvarim. We don't know if it's a trua. It might be the combination thereof. So there's a tremendous machlokes about shvarim trua. Now we could go through the Rishonim and the Poskim if you like on a different occasion, but we're not learning Hilchos Shofar. I just want to use it, as we say in Hebrew, l'saber ta'ozen. Oh, look at that. Did you see that message from David? He blows shofar. So David, I don't know what you do about shvarim trua, because there are two opinions. One opinion says that you blow it in shtei neshimos, meaning that after you do the shvarim, do, whatever shvarim you do, you take a little bit of a breath and immediately do the trua. There's another man, the Omer says, B'neshima achas, which means you don't even take a breath. My minig, I'm usually the makri, I ask certain tkiyas to be tashrat b'neshima achas and certain to be b'shtei neshimos. So towards the end of davening, when we add another 40 kolos, we have what's called shvarim trua. And I tell the Baal Tokeya that he should listen carefully when I say, if I say shvarim trua, it means b'neshima achas. So I say shvarim trua, then it means take a breath in between. What's the machlokus all about? The question is, what is shvarim trua? Is it a combination of A plus B, and A and B remain separate entities as long as there's no hefsek between them, or no? It's one kol, which is called shvarim trua. And the nafkamina is going to be whether you require neshima achas. If it's one kol, and these two kols are different, how do you integrate them to one kol? You need a dover mitzaref. You need something in a positive sense to integrate them. But if you hold the two separate kolos, then just take a breath in between, separate the two kolos, don't be mafsik in between, and that's enough. I don't need a dover mitzaref. I don't need a neshima achas. Ask me in brachos, in the tzushtel, what do we need? Do we need a mitzaref, or it's enough that there's no hefsek? And I will tell you that the answer depends upon what kind of a bracha you're talking about. If you're talking about Birchat HaNehenin, we need a mitzaref. He grabs onto the cherry and he makes a bracha on the cherry. The bracha is chal on the cherry, and the cherry receives the bracha, and it's one entity. That's called neshima achas, so to speak, because you need a davar mitzaref. But if someone would say, I don't need a davar mitzaref, there's the bracha and the hana, two separate entities. I just have to make sure there's no hefsek in between. So why then, in the case of shtika, where you delayed implementing the hana, Shulchan Aruch paskins, you have to make the bracha again? Or in the case where you had two cherries in front of you, you dropped the one that you started with, you have to make a new bracha on the second cherry. Why? The answer is because you're lacking a davar mitzaref. And that's a separate halach in Birchas HaNehenin, where the bracha and the hana have to be integrated to form one unit that's indivisible, one entity. So you ask me now the following question. I made Kiddush on a cup of wine. I recited two brachos. I recited the Birchas HaKiddush, Kiddush HaShabbos, and I recited Bar Pri HaGofen. And now it spills. So I'm going to tell you that there's a fundamental difference between the Kiddush itself, the Birchas HaKiddush, and the Bar Pri HaGofen. The Bar Pri HaGofen is a Birchas HaNehenin, and it requires a mitzaref. Once you spilled the wine, then your Bar Pri HaGofen could not be chal on a second kos. And in fact, it wasn't chal on any kos, because you took that kos into your hand and it spilled. But as far as the Kiddush is concerned, if you can bring another cup without a hesech hadas, then there's no davar mafsik. And even though I grant you that the Kiddush and the yayin of the second kos are two separate entities, that's fine. As long as there's no chotzetz that generates a chatzitza between the two. And I told this over to Alan Dubin, my genius neighbor upstairs, and he said, very, very good. I don't get that from him too often. So let's go back now to the case of Mayim and apply these same rules to the case of Mayim. If somebody fooled you and now you have to get wine, so then you can't even attach your Kiddush, Mekadesh HaShabbos, to the second cup of wine because there was a mafsik. All of a sudden you're running around looking for yayin. But if the yayin was munach lefanov, then immediately he will drink the wine. And what's the davar mitzaref here? The fact that he made a Bar Pri HaGofen, assuming that he's going to drink the wine. The wine is right there in front of him. He made the Bari Pri Hagafen in order to drink the wine. Now I have a Dover Mitzaref. I don't even need the Bari Pri Hagafen to repeat it itself. In the case of Nishpach, the Bari Pri Hagafen was gone because the yayin spilled. And now you got to start from scratch. As far as Kiddush is concerned, if you immediately substitute a cup of wine for the one that spilled, fine. But as far as Bari Pri Hagafen, you don't have a Dover Mitzaref. But if you have yayin munach lefana, and his das was to make the Bari Pri Hagafen on that cup of wine, that's called a Dover Mitzaref, and I don't even believe he has to make a Bari Pri Hagafen. Okay, Rabbosai, we'll stop here and think about it, because I'm if you don't realize it, I'm very excited.
Well, can you put the shirim on? I gotta listen to the last part again. Can you put them on? I can't.
You have to join my YouTube group, and if you do, then it should be there. I mean, Chaim Besson takes care of it.
I don't see
But
it.
listen, Rabbosai, I just want to say one thing. I feel that we need a little